Hello, Husky Nation. This is Mr. Gagner, your drama teacher, here to welcome you to The Village. This is your English department's brand new summer reading series, designed to help us stay connected during this unprecedented summer. Every other Wednesday, your English teachers will be reading an essay specifically chosen to be engaging and relevant to what we're all experiencing right now. After each reading, we'll tell you how you can reach back out and help us keep these conversations going. This week, we'll be exploring anxiety. Challenged by Another Name by James Lincoln Collier. Before we read, think about what the word anxiety means to you. What role has anxiety played in your life? How exactly would you define anxiety? As we read, you'll be able to see similarities and differences between your definition and the author's definition, and we'll start to think about why those might exist. Without further ado, let's get reading.
Anxiety. Challenged by Another Name by James Lincoln Collier. Between my sophomore and junior years at college, a chance came up for me to spend the summer vacation working on a ranch in Argentina. My roommate's father was in the cattle business, and he wanted Ted to see something of it. Ted said he would go if he could take a friend, and he chose me. The idea of spending 2 months on the fabled Argentine pampas was exciting. Then I began to have second thoughts. I had never been very far from New England, and I had been homesick my first weeks at college. What would it be like in a strange country? What about the language? And besides, I had promised to teach my younger brother to sail that summer. The more I thought about it, the more the prospect daunted me. I began waking up nights in a sweat. In the end, I turned down the proposition. As soon as Ted asked somebody else to go, I began kicking myself. A couple weeks later, I went home to my old summer job, unpacking cartons at the local supermarket, feeling very low. I had turned down something I wanted to do because I was scared and had ended up feeling depressed. I stayed that way for a long time, and it didn't help when I went back to college in the fall to discover that Ted and his friend had a terrific time.
In the long run, that unhappy summer taught me a valuable lesson, out of which I developed a rule for myself. Do what makes you anxious. Don't do what makes you depressed. I am not, of course, talking about severe states of anxiety or depression, which require medical attention. What I mean is that kind of anxiety we call stage fright. Butterflies in the stomach, a case of the nerves. The feelings we have at a job interview, when we're giving a big party, when we have to make an important presentation at the office. And the kind of depression I am referring to is that downhearted feeling of the blues, when we don't seem to be interested in anything, when we can't get going, and seem to have no energy. I was confronted by this sort of situation toward the end of my senior year. As graduation approached, I began to think about taking a crack at making my living as a writer. But one of my professors was urging me to apply to graduate school and aim at a teaching career. I wavered. The idea of trying to live by writing was scary. A lot more scary than spending the summer on the pampas, I thought. Back and forth I went, making my decision, unmaking it. Suddenly, I realized that every time I gave up the idea of writing, that sinking feeling went through me. Gave me the blues. The thought of graduate school wasn't what depressed me. It was giving up on what deep in my gut I really wanted to do. Right then, I learned another lesson. To avoid that kind of depression meant, inevitably, having to endure a certain amount of worry and concern. The great Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard believed that anxiety always arises when we confront the possibility of our own development. It seems to be a rule of life that you can't advance without getting that old, familiar, jittery feeling. Even as children, we discover this when we try to expand ourselves by, say, learning to ride a bike, or going out for the school play. Later in life, we get butterflies when we think about having that first child, or uprooting the family from the old hometown to find a better opportunity halfway across the country. Any time, it seems, that we set out aggressively to get something we want, we meet up with anxiety. And it's going to be our traveling companion, at least part of the way, into any new venture. When I first began writing magazine articles, I was frequently required to interview big names. People like Richard Burton, Joan Rivers, William Masters, or baseball great Dizzy Dean. Before each interview, I would get butterflies and my hands would shake.
At the time, I was doing some writing about music, and one person I particularly admired was the great composer Duke Ellington. On stage and on television, he seemed the very model of the confident, sophisticated man of the world. Then I learned that Ellington still got stage fright. If the highly honored Duke Ellington, who had appeared on the bandstand some 10,000 times over 30 years, had anxiety attacks, who was I to think I could avoid them? I went on doing those frightening interviews, and one day, as I was getting onto a plane for Washington to interview columnist Joseph Alsop, I suddenly realized to my astonishment that I was looking forward to the meeting. What had happened to those butterflies? Well, in truth, they were still there, but there were fewer of them. I had benefited, I discovered, from a process psychologists call extinction. If you put an individual in an anxiety-provoking situation often enough, he will eventually learn that there is anything to worry about. Which brings us to a corollary to my basic rule. You'll never eliminate anxiety by avoiding the things that cause it. I remember how my son Jeff was when I first began to teach him to swim at the lake cottage where we spent our summer vacations. He resisted, and when I got him into the water, he sank and sputtered and wanted to quit. But I was insistent, and by summer's end, he was splashing around like a puppy. He had extinguished his anxiety the only way he could, by confronting it. The problem, of course, is that it is one thing to urge somebody else to take on those anxiety-producing challenges. It is quite another to get ourselves to do it.
Some years ago, I was offered a writing assignment that would require 3 months of travel through Europe. I had been abroad a couple of times on the usual, if it's Tuesday, this must be Belgium trips, but I hardly could claim to know any way around a continent. Moreover, my knowledge of foreign languages was limited to a little college French. I hesitated. How would I, unable to speak the language, totally unfamiliar with local geography or transportation systems, set up interviews and do research? It seemed impossible, and with considerable regret, I sat down to write a letter begging off. Halfway through, a thought, which I subsequently made into another corollary to my basic rule, ran through my mind. You can't learn if you don't try. So I accepted the assignment. There were some bad moments, but by the time I had finished the trip, I was an experienced traveler. And ever since, I have never hesitated to head for even the most exotic of places, without guides or even advanced bookings, confident that somehow I will manage. The point is that the new, the different, is almost by definition scary. But every time you try something, you learn. And as the learning piles up, the world opens up to you. I've made parachute jumps, learned to ski at 40, flown up the Rhine in a balloon, and I know I'm going to keep on doing such things. It's not because I'm braver or more daring than others. I'm not. But I don't let the butterflies stop me from doing what I want. Accept anxiety as another name for challenge, and you can accomplish wonders.
Now, having read Collier's essay, do you agree with him that anxiety has a positive side? Maybe you can give an example from your own life of a decision that's made you feel anxious as opposed to a decision that's left you feeling depressed. This can be related to your time at Northwest, recent events in the world, or anything else. We want to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to any of the teachers who've read today via email or in this video's comments section. We would love to keep the conversation going with you, and we might even feature some of the most interesting conversations we have in our next reading in a couple weeks from now, with your permission, of course. Until then, remember that all of us here at Northwest care about you. Stay happy and healthy, Huskies, and we'll see you next time.